Hello guys and welcome back to HJW Gaming. In this video we're going to be continuing on our commander guides and looking at the tier 1 dwarven commander Dwalin. Now Dwalin is almost like a miniature tier 1 version of Gimli. You'll see later on they do share a couple of skills. And in that respect he is therefore a damage dealing commander. So if you look at his stats here you can see he has pretty decent damage, you know, normal HP, low command, and then high attack stat, reasonable defense, very low focus, and reasonable initiative as well. As far as gearing goes, you want to try and gear him to have as much attack as possible and damage as possible. Ideally you'd look to get that attack stat above 200 and then focus on damage as much as possible. His best in slot weapon therefore is, as it is with most damage commanders, the Axe of Khazad-dûm, as this gives the highest amount of attack and when well refined gives a large amount of damage as well. Other good options in this regard are also the Blazing Tongue, which can give a decent amount of attack and has a very good damage stat, and also the Black Bow, which are probably three of the best items for him. For exquisite counterparts, you're really only going to look at the Battle Axe, as this has the highest damage and attack stat in this category. However, I'd very much recommend going towards the flawless versions like the Axe of Khazad-dûm, as even with a very minimal number of strengthens and refines, it is levels above its exquisite counterpart, so I definitely recommend trying your best to get flawless gear where possible. I'd only recommend 2.0 gear and no Rise to War Classic gear, as the 2.0 gear is the only gear that grants damage, and that's one of the most important things, so there's no kind of classic gear to recommend here. For chest pieces, if you're looking for the best 2.0 item for damage commanders, you want to pick up the Berserker's Raiment, as this grants the highest amount of attack possible. As far as classic flawless gear goes, you have a couple of options. The Durin's Plate grants a good amount of damage as well as some HP and damage for your troops as well if you use dwarven troops. And you can also do very well with the Golden Skin with the Dominance effect, as this can grant additional attack, so you can get huge amounts of attack from these items. In this case, the Rise to War Classic gear does actually grant more attack than the Rise to War 2.0 gear. The only thing you're missing is HP. So I do think in some cases, if you're a little bit low on attack, the Rise to War Classic gear can be the best option. But of course, it's a balancing act of getting that attack probably above 200 to 220, and then looking towards maybe changing instead to Classic and dropping that attack for more HP so you get more survivability on your commanders. So it's a balancing act between all of your gear on your commander. For exquisite gear, you do have quite a few options. The Goblin Armour with Gallant is the best here, as it can grant up to a massive 54 attack when fully refined and strengthened, as the Gallant provides the plus 18 to go with the 36 on the armour itself. The Scale Mail with Gallant can also be a very good option, as again this provides a decent amount of attack, less than the Goblin Armour, but that plus 18 from the Gallant effect as well. A classic Superior Hauberk is also good, as it can grant plus 30 attack as well as 15 unit defense. And if you're looking for 2.0 exquisite gear, I would look towards the Scale Mail again, as this provides the highest amount of commander attack with plus 15. As far as helms go, for both classic and 2.0 gear, the best in slot here for flawless gear is the Cask of Pride, as this grants the highest amount of commander attack. Now personally I prefer the classic Cask of Pride, as whilst the 2.0 Cask of Pride grants slightly higher attack, the classic does also grant unit defense, which can be very good for survivability of your units, so I think this is the preferred option, though having a little bit more HP on your commander as well as commander defense can come in handy when you run out of troops, but I find generally the 1.0 version is better, but you can't do wrong kind of with either of these. For For exquisite gear, the classic full helm comes out head and shoulders above anything else in this kind of exquisite category for Dwalin, as when fully strengthened it does grant a massive plus 45 attack, which is actually very comparable with its flawless counterpart. And if you have the melee vigor effect on there as well, you can also reduce the amount of damage that you receive on your melee troops by up to 6%, which can also come very much in handy. So in this regard, I wouldn't be too worried about using exquisite gear or flawless gear, as exquisite can be almost as good. But an accessory, you definitely want to be using 2.0 gear for exactly the same reason as the weapon, as only 2.0 gear can grant damage on its as its effect. So you're going to want to look towards using either the Palantir of Orthanc, which is the best in slot, as it grants the highest amount of attack and can be refined to have the highest amount of damage, or the Drums of Barad-dûr, as it grants the second most attack and also a decent amount of damage as well. For set effects, you're going to ideally want to look to use, in my opinion, something defensive like Fortitude or Divide and Conquer, as the way the damage formula works, you actually get a higher advantage using a 10% damage reduction than you do through a damage gain. But if you don't have something like Divide and Conquer or Fortitude available, using Might or Perseverance can also be a good choice. If you're using low strengthened gear or only using exquisite gear, then I'd recommend Sharp Blade, as you likely have a very low amount of attack, and actually getting that plus 20 attack is more beneficial to you than the plus 10%. So ideally I would look towards using a Fortitude set or Divide and Conquer. If you don't have that available, then look towards using Might or Perseverance, and if you have low attack, instead use Sharp Blade. Now let's look into his skills. You'll notice here he has two skills the same as Gimli, which is why he's kind of considered the mini Gimli, in both Durin's Blood and Experienced Warrior, which are two of the better trees in Gimli's skill tree. So again, they're going to be the skills of choice for Dwalin. The only difference with Dwalin here is he doesn't have a third skill tree for inflicting commander damage, unlike Gimli. He instead has a little bit of troop buffing under the Adventurer skill, which isn't great, and a little bit of healing under the Musician skill tree, which everyone knows healing in 2.0 is not great at all, so neither of these skills are particularly brilliant. So we're going to be looking at the top Respect 0 and the Respect 3. So the first skill you want to put skill points into is his Respect 3, which is Durin's Blood, as this is his best and highest damage skill. Additionally, you want to make sure you always put your first skill point into this, as once you get to 5 skill points, you get skill damage dealt plus 10%, which you want to come into effect before the next skill, Experienced Warrior, deals its damage, so you can reap the benefit of that 10% bonus skill damage when the Experienced Warrior damage comes in. But Durin's Blood, if you put all of your points into this, get it to 10 out of 10, it can deal 700% physical damage once to 1 to 2 enemy formations, so potentially 1400% damage every third round due to the 2-round cooldown. So this will come into effect in rounds 3, 6 and 9. In addition to that plus 10% skill damage mentioned earlier, when you add 10 skill points, you also get plus 5 attack on your commander, which can help boost that damage that little bit more. The next skill you want to put your skill points into, as mentioned, is Experienced Warrior. Once you get 10 skill points into this, you can deal 200% physical damage to 2 enemy formations, so 400% damage in total, and this has a shorter cooldown as it activates every second round, so in rounds 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10. Once you have 5 skill points in, you actually gain plus 6 attack upon dealing damage up to 5 stacks, so an extra plus 30 attack after the in the 10th round basically. And if you add 10 skill points, you can also get another plus 5 attack, so he does continue boosting his attack to keep increasing his damage as the battle wears on. For remaining skill points, if you have him high respect, I would recommend putting any remaining skill points into Adventurer, just to boost the damage of your Dwarven units that little bit more. And you want to make sure to use Dwarven troops on him when you get to this point, though this isn't a massive difference to Musician, but I think Adventurer is slightly more beneficial in my opinion. Into Dwalin's Relic. It's quite unlikely that many people get to this point, as of course ascending him to tier 3 is enormous cost for tier 1s due to their respect items, but nonetheless I'll cover it anyway. His relic is the twin axes. Now this can be useful for a little bit of bonus HP, though that's not ideal, and a little bit of bonus attack and unit defense can also come in handy. However, the effect on this battle dance is not great at all. Whilst damage dealt increases up to potentially 100%, then that sounds brilliant. However, it only has a 20% chance of activation, so on average will only activate twice in 10 rounds, and that's if every fight lasts the full 10 rounds. So in my opinion, it isn't worth all the cost to get, so I would recommend not picking up this relic. But if you have kind of materials going spare for whatever reason, then you can pick it up. It does synergize with him. It just doesn't activate as often as you would like for it to have a real effect on his damage output. Now, troops to use on him. Of course, when you get towards the adventurer skill, you want to use dwarves, as otherwise you won't reap any benefit from the skill whatsoever. So the best troop to use on him will be guardians. The reason for this being is that they're very tanky troops that can take a lot of damage and survive as long as possible, whilst Dwalin himself inflicts as much damage as possible. Another dwarven option you could go for is the Ram Rider if you're using an all cavalry formation, as the Ram Rider will help reduce opponents' defense if it hits the right target before Dwalin, and allow Dwalin to inflict an additional amount of damage, though in my opinion using tanky troops like the Guardian is preferable. And lastly, you could also use the Iron Warrior, which is a strong tier 4, though this focuses more on dealing damage than tanking damage, so I think the Guardian is still the preferable option. Now, before of course you get to Adventurer, you're kind of not really limited to using dwarves other than by his bloodline. So with his bloodline it grants additional attack and defense if you use dwarf units, so you will be losing out if you don't use dwarves. But if you want to use something different, cold drakes are also an excellent option before you get to the Adventurer skill tree. Of course, if you are at that point and you want to use cold drakes, then you want to switch to the musician skill tree. But cold drakes are a really strong tank unit, so can survive for a long time, and they also count as colossal units, so you can repel the enemy armies, tank a lot of damage, and allow Dwalin to kind of do his thing. Now, what do I think of Dwalin overall? Now, out of the three kind of main dwarven damage dealers, of course you do have DAIN, who stands head and shoulders currently above the rest as a tier 3 commander, doing a hell of a lot of damage. And then there's a small drop off between him and Gimli. I do think the gap between Gimli and Dwalin is a little bit larger, as Dwalin just really lacks that final damage dealing skill really to push him up a level. Whereas Gimli can use Experienced Warrior just for 5 points, so you can use that bonus skill damage and the bonus attack to power up his third damage skill. Dwalin just doesn't have that in the locker, so therefore he just doesn't have the same damage output capabilities as Gimli, and obviously not as much as DAIN. Saying that, he is still an excellent damage dealer, and I definitely think he's on par with some of, if not a lot of, the tier 2 commanders. I'd probably put him above commanders like Aragorn 2, for example, who are damage dealers in the tier 2, so I think he definitely punches above his weight. And he's definitely the strongest of all the tier 1 commanders. I'd put him above my last reviewed commander in Agzok, definitely, just because he has that extra attack. He has one of the best attack stats in the game, so that, even with his lack of skills, does help him output a lot of damage. As far as whether he's free-to-play friendly or not, I'm going to say yes, as he is usable at Respect 3 and he is a Tier 1 commander, so you can use him pretty much immediately, particularly if you're starting a new account on a Season 1, for example. He's definitely the first thing I would personally aim for. But of course, if you're looking towards the higher tiers, trying to get and compete with really strong commanders, then I'd probably look towards a tier 3 or a tier 2 and saving up for those even as a free-to-play player, as of course ascension costs to get him up to that mythic level really are quite expensive. So he's definitely free-to-play friendly up until you get to that point. Anyway, that's everything from me. Hopefully you've enjoyed everything in this video, and if you have, please drop a like and please consider subscribing to see more of my content in future. And with that, I've been HW Gaming, and I hope to see you on the next one.